So before we start doing your homework, I'm going to ask you something. Do you remember what you went through last time? Well, I guess I knew you didn't know much. Well, let's start training in the history of magic. You'll have to take an exam soon, so as headmaster, I won't let any students skip class. Listen carefully and then take notes. The theme of the lesson is the killing of the goblins. It took place in 1474 in the town of Preston, Lancashire. At that time, a decapitated corpse was fished out of the River Riddle and lay there for a long time. Muggles at the time thought the murdered man was a common dwarf. The body had been tampered with by the waters of the river and the head was missing. A search was organized, but no one with similar descriptions was listed. It was at once decided that the victim of the unknown was an artiste of a traveling circus who had not long ago visited the city. At this time, the wizarding community was already sounding the alarm. Then the Magical Council received several reports of missing goblins, so specialist wizards joined the investigation. His body was smuggled out, and soon the Magical Council's wizards found his head as well. At that time, the magicians already suspected that the victim was not a dwarf at all, but a goblin. Within 2 months, 3 more bodies were found, but this time without any signs of violent death. The whole point was, of course, that the victims had been subjected to spells that prevented the naked eye from seeing the true causes. The best wizards the Magical Council could find were involved in the investigation, but the murders continued. The goblins did not participate in the search, but made a lot of noise, claiming that it was a conspiracy of wizards against their race. Calming the magical people was not a simple matter. While some were busy restoring order among them, other mages involved in the case were able to detect a pattern in what was happening. Firstly, the goblins disappeared with a certain periodicity and found them in turn in each county and exclusively in the cities. It was not until 2 years later that the search was successful. Then it was possible to reach a certain Yardley Plat. This 30-year-old wizard was caught at the scene of the crime when he tried to kill a scared-to-death goblin. The murderer was tried in 1476. The trial lasted about half an hour. In 2 years, the wizard took the lives of more than 40 goblins. Platt was imprisoned in Azkaban. He was given a life sentence. It seemed that everything should end. However, 40 years later, the amnesty touched the wizard. The one was released at the age of 70. Platt lost sight of him for a long time, but at the age of 111, he decided to remember his youth by brutally killing a goblin who was in the wrong place. Once again, the Magical Council had to puzzle over the case. Then James Cooper, who had just graduated from Hogwarts, remembered the events of 80 years ago. Yardley Platt was immediately captured and immediately sent to Azkaban. A month later, he was sentenced to the Dementor's Kiss, the most gruesome execution in the magical world. So in 1557, the world finally got rid of a brutal killer who took the lives of goblins only. Now the subject of the second lesson is Cornish Pixies. The Cornish Pixies are rather strange creatures, but big fans of pranking wizards. Quite often their mischief is out of line. They communicate with each other by alternating sounds we don't understand. Cornish, they are named after their habitat, which is probably understandable. Most of them live in the county of Cornwall, which is located in the southwest of Britain, and is also part of the duchy of the same name. The 17th century is rich in cases of Pixies attacking people. Knowing no limits to their antics, they repeatedly lifted careless travelers to great heights. It was still tolerable when they simply left a wizard or a muggle on the roof of some house or barn, but often enough they could throw a person into the water or into the hayloft. Most of the time there were no injuries from such things, but no one enjoyed it either. In the 1930s, the attacks became more frequent. Muggles were now suffering from varmints, which in turn caused the Magical Council a lot of trouble. Its staff now often had to go to the scene of accidents that would heal the injuries, as well as clean the memory of the Muggles. Soon, a whole team of healers and Muggles were on duty in Cornwall. It was only in the 40s that a completely unexpected incident occurred. In 1642, 30-year-old sorceress Dimfa Furmag, which you now see in front of you. The professor pointed to the board with the image of a magician, decided to rest in Cornwall. Whilst walking one day, she noticed a number of pixies flying straight at her. Trying to run away, she stumbled and was soon lifted by the creatures to a decent height. Whether due to excitement or some other reason, she didn't use her wand to defend herself against the creatures. Expecting to fall soon, the sorceress squeezed her eyes shut, but opening them after a while, she realized that the pixies were carrying her further and further away from where she was. The varmints carried the woman to her home, where they left the poor woman all alone. Her magic wand was lost during the flight, and the sorceress was afraid to descend on her own from such a height. Contrary to expectations, the pixies did not leave her to starve and brought her food regularly, but she was not allowed anything more. Mrs. Furmag was not found until a month later, and it took her another month to recover in a hospital for magical injuries and ailments. This incident provoked the mages to take much greater action. Pixie massacres were now a common occurrence throughout the county of Cornwall. The Magical Council announced that there would be punishment for such behavior, but this did little to stop them. Wizards banded together in groups and deliberately hunted pixies in an attempt to protect their wives and children from the mad creatures. Dimfa Furmag, barely out of hospital, went to the government to demand the complete extermination of all Cornish pixies. Despite everything, the Magical Council refused to take such drastic measures. Although a pixie capture team was already working in the county, the pixies were caged and hidden away in a specially equipped building. In this way, the government wanted to preserve the population. Riots by those dissatisfied with the Magical Council's stance were recorded quite often in Britain, but they were all successfully extinguished. Incompetent mages, apparently, still realized the reason for hunting them and soon went into hiding. The frenzy around the pixies died down after a few months, but their numbers were greatly reduced by the events of the mid-17th century. Since then, the population of these magical creatures has not increased much for nearly 4 centuries, and they are now a long way from the numbers they used to be. Next lesson topic, the rising of 1203, the creation of Azkaban. In the year 1203, Bland Strauss, a dark wizard, decided to challenge all Muggles. For once long ago, they were the ones who had brutally murdered his family. Most likely, it was revenge. The mage was good at influencing people. Wizards joined Bland one after another, attacking Muggle villages under his leadership, robbing them, killing them. All in all, they did irreparable damage to the whole of society. They killed everyone. There were no women, children, men, or old people for them. Everyone fell into the category of victim. According to some reports, that was when the unforgivable Cruciatus spell was first used. The Magic Council was in a panic. What to do? How to fight Strauss's men? At the same time, the Dark Mage's army grew ever larger. This was not the end of the problems, as one would wish. Having solved one, the Council got another, newer, and more solvable one. The fact was that there had never been such mass imprisonments before. The prisoners had been kept in cells at the Magical Council, which now no longer had enough space. It was urgent to build new cells, and at a meeting called, it was decided to create a special prison for wizards. Azimuth the Boar traveled the country for weeks in search of the perfect place. At the moment when the wizard's powers had almost left him, he found an uninhabited island in the North Sea, which the Magical Council decided to assign to him. For several days, about 100 mages labored to build the fortress. Another day was needed to transport all the prisoners to their new home. In 1206, the prison was opened and named Azkaban in honor of the island's finder. Among the wizards, the strongest were chosen. Exactly those who could exert great influence, but at the same time keep them in normal form. The prisoners were kept extremely strictly, and suffering and torment became the eternal inhabitants of this prison. It was for this reason that the convicts were perpetually experiencing negative emotions. Fear, sadness. The list was endless. They forgot joy, happiness, pleasure, and carefree days. The prisoners were already cursing the days when they joined the Dark Leader, but unfortunately, there was no turning back. The energy emanating from them was forever gathering. This was most likely due to the lack of communication with the magical world. After a while, when such energy was already sufficient, dark spots formed, which also materialized into dark creatures, cold, tall. They often created a whistling sound, drawing in with the air the positive emotions, which, despite the oppressive atmosphere, still remained in the inhabitants of Azkaban. They hovered above the ground, spreading a horrible frost. Their breath was stinking, and their hands were covered with ghastly scabs. It took the Magical Council a long time, months to be exact, to make contact with them. They are now known to us as Dementors. Well done. I see you did well and wrote everything down. Remember, in class the teacher will talk even faster than I do, so you must learn to write everything down quickly. Next time, come to me, and we'll continue to study the lessons you missed.